Get ready to plunge into the electrifying world of tech news with the Next Tech Check podcast. Hosted by Smart Tech Research's Mark Vena and Next Curve's Leonard Lee. This podcast offers bold insights, controversial debates, and monitors the pulse of innovation. It's the only podcast committed to keeping what's next in tech in check.
Hello, everyone. My name is Mark Vena, CEO and Principal Analyst at Smart Tech Research. And this is Leonard Lee, Founder and Executive Analyst at Next Curve. Welcome to the Next Tech Check podcast. Today is Tuesday, October 31st, 2023. This is our Scary Fest podcast following the big afternoon release, or late afternoon for those of us who are on the West Coast. We're going to jump into that. We're also going to talk a little bit about the Qualcomm Snapdragon Summit that vacationing Leonard Lee was once on another vacation out in Hawaii.
It's never a vacation.
Yeah, it is a lot of work, and it really is a lot of work. And you did a lot.
I haven't recovered yet, quite honestly.
No, and you did a lot of yeoman work, and I'm not going to pat you in the back because you really don't deserve it. But you did a lot of good interviews. Short, 5-6 minute interviews with a lot of very highly visible people in our field. And I think that's great because you're not giving people just your perspective on things. But Apple did have their big announcement last week. Why don't we just start with last night?
Last night, yeah.
Last night, yeah. Let me pull that up on the screen here. And what I will say, and we'll talk about the scary fast thing first, and we'll go back to the Snapdragon Summit.
Oh, really? You want to do that? Okay.
Yeah, let's do that. Yeah, let's mix it up a little bit because they are related. The topics are related. We're going to talk about that in a second.
Ooh. It's like water and oil and water. We're doing something very dangerous here, man.
Let me make some comments here first, and then you can pick me with some needles here. What I thought was interesting, first of all, is I thought Qualcomm had a nice announcement last week with their Snapdragon X Elite chipset, which they made some pretty bold claims in terms of performance comparisons. We'll get into that. Would love to get your view on that. And they were almost gleeful on the stage. I never saw Cristiano so gleeful. He was almost doing a tap dance.
Yeah.
And I think when a vendor feels that confident, they feel that they have something there. The thing that was interesting, which is that immediately after that, the rumors came out. Apple said, hey, we're going to do this late Monday afternoon in the Pacific time zone, early evening announcement. Apple's doing that because they want to preempt Qualcomm with their announcement from last week. And last night was a 30-minute. It was probably one of the more shorter, which I love, by the way. Yeah, I love that. It was not longer than a Laverne and Shirley episode on TV, just to use that as kind of as a comparison.
Sure.
So, and it was a canned event. The thing was it was all completely pre-recorded that they did several weeks ago. So I don't buy the whole thing that Apple was reacting to Qualcomm. And someone said to me actually earlier today.
A lot of people.
Qualcomm is doing this because they're trying to preempt Apple on Monday night. And I'm like, this Snapdragon thing, they always do it. They always do a summit in Hawaii every year for the last many years. And I don't think it's all planned. So that's all BS. But actually, so that's the one little observation I just want to make up at the Apple scary fast thing, and then we'll get into it. But why don't we start with the Qualcomm Snapdragon thing? We'll go back to the order of the topics. And give me your perspective, Leonard, of what you thought.
Yeah, for most folks who didn't go to Snapdragon Summit or didn't really pay attention to it, the big news coming out of Qualcomm at this year's summit was their new Series X line, which is basically a PC-focused or Windows on ARM focused processor that leverages their new Orion. These cores are based on Nuvia technology and engineering that was acquired through that acquisition in 2021. So this is kind of a big deal, right? Because there was a lot of, originally these cores were geared toward server, right? So bringing about this whole new generation or enabling a new generation of ARM-based servers. With these cores, but what Qualcomm has done since the acquisition, it has leveraged this IP for PC and their advancement into the PC market, right? And so there was a lot of anticipation built around, and quite frankly, a lot of expectations built around what was announced at Snapdragon Summit. And the processor to be releasing sometime probably in the middle of next year. They didn't really give specifics on timing. Is called the X Elite, as you mentioned. So that really was the big news coming out of this year's event.
So let me just give you my observation that I really want to get your, because we haven't talked about this, so I'm getting your reaction live to this. My concern is that, as you know, the Windows on ARM has been around for several years. Really hasn't made a whole lot of traction in the marketplace. You can probably count market share on half of one hand. So, and Qualcomm has had offerings there in that category. And by the way, there've been some prominent players who've had ARM-based Windows offerings out there. And the thing that concerns me is that now Qualcomm has some really commendable, performance-worthy technology vis-a-vis these acquisitions that Qualcomm has made. Is the fact that it's on ARM, does the roadblock become, well, it runs on ARM? You know, the Windows versions of ARM has some limitations in terms of compatibility. It doesn't have that broad backward compatibility that the x86 version of Windows has. As you know, because at your very heart, you know the IT space very well. Corporate and CIOs and IT guys, they like backward compatibility as much as it's a pain in the ass from a support standpoint. They like having that assurance. Will that be a holdup in terms of its appeal for the general consumer? We'll start there, and for IT managers. So go ahead.
Yeah, that's a really good question. Yes, and you're absolutely right. Windows on ARM is not a new thing. In fact, Microsoft itself, I think, launched one of what you would call the first. One really struggled in the market, and eventually Microsoft just basically gave up on an ARM version of their Surface tablet. Now, yeah, you're absolutely right. This is what you mentioned is one of the big hurdles that Qualcomm and anyone else that's coming into the Windows on ARM, race is going to have to deal with that challenge. But here's something interesting to think about, though, because there was a lot of talk about emulation, and Qualcomm says that they have the emulation down. They're working very closely with Microsoft to make this stuff work and be performant and present very little overhead on the operation of, call it, versions of software applications, popular ones like Premiere and Photoshop, et cetera, et cetera. But the other way of thinking about it is, as we, everyone talks about the AI PC, this new era, right? And when you really think about it, we're talking about an era where heterogeneous computing is becoming more important. And, Ian Cutress, you will argue, yes, heterogeneous computing has been around for a long time, but it's also an area where it's expanding, becoming a lot more diverse, and new architectures are forming around this trend. And we also have to consider that, Windows on ARM might actually be in the right direction, because a lot of the legacy of what you're seeing being brought through into the PC space is actually coming from mobile computing. So these are mobile apps. So what we're probably going to see are a lot of applications look a lot more like our mobile applications than traditional Windows applications. And so we're seeing a lot of these productivity and creative tools that are running on, ARM-based, more heterogeneous compute-oriented processors and devices, taking on more of these AI functions, if you will, right? And a domain-specific, using domain-specific IP, whether it's an IPU or a VPU or whatever kind of PU you want, XPU, let's call it XPU. So in a way, it's a headwind for them, but it also could be a tailwind given the direction that software will eventually go. Advantage of all these new AI, AI PC capabilities.
Yep. Well, and the interesting thing is when you look at it, and again, as kind of transition into talking a little bit about the Apple piece here, Apple and Qualcomm are going after really two different markets with their new silicon. I mean, the M1, the baseline M1, the Pro, and the Max implementation, which is what they announced last night. Those are not going to be low-end PCs. I just configured one because it's time for me to refresh my M1 Ultra.
Yeah.
And my configuration, and I know you're going to give me a gift card later this year for all the wonderful work we've done together. But I'm going to have to spend $5,000, $5,100 if I want to replicate the exact same configuration. If I max it out, by the way, with 120 gigabytes of memory, which yours truly will do because I do a lot of video editing. But that's a lot of money. I can guarantee you that the Snapdragon X Elite silicon chips are not going to end up in a lot of $5,000 ARM-based PCs. They're not going to be at very low-end prices, but they're going to be much more aggressively priced than the counterparts.
Yeah, I think for call it a premium mobile creator segment, I think is where it could really fit in well. And one of the companies that did show up and was showcased at Snapdragon Summit was Blackmagic Designs. I don't know if folks know who they are, but they're the creators of the wildly popular DaVinci Resolve. That's a serious tool, creator tool, right?
Oh, yeah,
and
I use it.
Right. And so they're already working with Qualcomm and likely Microsoft to figure out, well, how do we tap it and take advantage of basically the 70 tops of compute power to support various quote unquote AI-ish type of workloads. That could be pretty game changing, right? Because a lot of the benefits of AR are typically pretty narrow and domain specific, and but one of the things that was really highlighted, actually, it was a takeaway from a lot of the conversations I had with Qualcomm executives and their partners, is that these domain-specific applications that are going to tend to be a lot more lighter weight are going to be the things that really augment and drive productivity, And so to be able to tap into that, I mean, developers need to think differently. They do, the APIs and frameworks that allow them to access all of this new compute. And I think a lot of that's going to be the same for, Intel when they come out with these Meteor Lake or Core Ultra machines. Same thing, right? I mean, these are new computing paradigms that we're looking at, and the software is going to evolve, right? So in a way, there's going to be a more level playing field happening in the Windows space, in the Windows ecosystem, PC ecosystem, and that could actually play well for Qualcomm and others that are coming in with ARM offerings, because like I mentioned, Qualcomm comes in with a lot of legacy in this, plus mobile computing that has been leading heterogeneous compute far ahead of PC, right?
So I got a couple of loaded questions for you, and I'll start with my first one because I love to ask loaded questions.
Oh no.
It'll be fine. The first one is, and this is going to be well, maybe it won't be that controversial. Are we getting to the point right now where, well, in the old days, the benchmarks were always against Intel, mighty Intel, x86.
Right.
Are we seeing right now NVIDIA is going to be doing their own CPU shortly? They're going to jump into the Windows arms race. Arms race, whatever you want to call it. You've got AMD doing their own silicon right now, and they've already done that. Although I think that's x86 compatible, if I'm not mistaken, so that's an advantage with their lightweight SoC. have we gotten to the point, Leonard? Do you think that comparisons to Intel are even relevant anymore, and that there needs to be new benchmark comparisons against the Qualcomms of the world? Now, again, that's a loaded question, and you can never count. I don't think you want to count Intel out, but
Yeah.
What you think? I'm being too provocative in making that statement?
No. I think you're making a great point, and benchmarking is continually a more difficult task. The context, being able to capture context in simple terms, is very difficult, and this is a point that I brought up to the folks at Qualcomm. And there are a lot of these more traditional benchmarks everyone uses, but the question is what is the actual, how does that translate to the actual experience that end users use? And I think that was a point that you made prior to us pushing that record button that I thought was really good. It's this is fine. This gives you an idea of the certain aspects of performance and suggestion of design. But one of the things that these benchmarks don't really tell you, and Qualcomm made a big deal out of this, was the efficiency, peak performance. But how efficiently does the chip actually perform, right? And so this whole, probably the most important metric now is performance per watt, right? Everyone's talking about that now. But now the question is, what are the metrics that actually effectively support that? And then how do we
validate that, right?
Yeah, a meaningful benchmark, right? And so it's really, really challenging. I don't know. What are your thoughts? I know you have plenty on this.
Yeah, well, my thoughts are that, first of all, the thing that concerns me, and this really goes to the point I want to make, is that the advantage that Apple has is they can optimize the operating system for their silicon. Nobody else uses their silicon. They can do all kinds of call it tricks, algorithms, all kinds of techniques to optimize the underlying levels of the operating system that boost the performance of the application.
Yeah.
Now that can happen on the Windows side too. I think it was not insignificant that at the Qualcomm announcement, they had the Microsoft CEO there. They had Cristiano had a chat with Adela, and the bottom line is, I think Microsoft realizes the sands are shifting, and they really have to now they have an obligation to beef up the ARM version of Windows, which ultimately that may where the puck is headed. But I always like to tell people, hey, when you're making whether it's a PC purchase decision or a Windows or a Mac purchase decision, you have to look at benchmarks that you believe are relevant from an application and operating system standpoint. And the reason why I bring up the Microsoft comment that I just said 30 seconds ago is that the problem with the challenge, I won't say problem, the challenge that Microsoft has is there's still very much a company that services multiple OEMs. And when you service multiple OEMs, the OEMs want to differentiate themselves. And will that differentiation de-optimize the performance advantages that you get if you just had one, if they were just serving one master? So that to me is a little bit of a variable. But I think the point you just made is a good one, in that until we get really good benchmarks that really show off the silicon in a very naked, isolated, hey, here's how it really functions, and here's how you can look at the sheer performance claims that companies make. Until you get that information, it's hard to make those calls, and let's face it, Leonard, the average person, not you, not me, not the guys that you hung out with having drinks with in Hawaii, they're not doing benchmarking. They may read a review on a website that may not be heavily benchmark oriented, and they're going to make those judgment calls on probably what the prior generation of hardware is, whether it's an older MacBook or whether it's an older Windows model. But the other, and only because we have only a couple of minutes left here, this is the second question I was going to ask you, is that it was interesting last night that Apple did not they didn't mention the word AI at all. I think I haven't scanned it completely.
Once,
okay. And if you blinked, you could have missed it. But the reality is that Apple Silicon has had, and I think you made this point the last night. I think I saw you make a social post.
I made this point. I made this point a long time ago,
That
beginning of the year.
Only mentioned once does not mean that Apple is completely doing duck and cover on AI. Their Apple Mobile Silicon has had AI capabilities for several years. Even their new stuff has even an enhanced, of course, neural network capability. Yeah. There was ray tracing mentioned last night.
Right, hardware. Yeah.
Yeah, what's kind of interesting is that Apple hasn't given up that the MacBook could be a platform for gaming. I'm a little bit less, a believer in that, but they haven't given up on that positioning. But I want you to reiterate that point that, hey, Apple is not ignoring AI. It's very much there. You just got to look under the covers a little bit. So,
yeah. I mean, they call it ML. They use the term ML quite a bit, and then they also use the term, especially with the advent of generative AI, or at least it becoming a term in the mainstream. They've been saying, the essence of what these large language models are built on. I think it's just that Apple is a few steps ahead of everyone else, and having already brought AI PC concepts to a laptop and a PC, and they've already been on the learning curve. I would say a very close second is Qualcomm. They are, and so I think Intel in many ways is a laggard, and AMD is just learning, right? Yes. Really, in terms of innovation in this emerging whatever AI PC era, I don't know who came up with that, but anyway, I think the pioneers are really Apple and Qualcomm.
Yes,
there really isn't anyone else,
Well, so. And the closing point that I'll make on this, because we're going to have to end it right here. The closing point I'll make is that Apple has a history of wanting to own phrases and marketing terms from a branding standpoint. If you recall, back in the good old days, it wasn't called 1394, that high-speed interface. I'm dating myself, when you could hook video cameras up to computers and transfer files. They called it Firewire. So I really think that Apple, they see this as a marketing opportunity too, that as this gets much more prominent, you're not going to see them use AI a lot. They'll either come up with some type of marketing brand, some type of reference to what AI does, so they can brand it from an Apple perspective. So there's going to be a lot more to come on that. But why don't we end there, if you don't mind, Leonard? But again, thanks for calling in. And as always, it was great chatting with you, Leonard. For our viewing and listening audience, thanks for making the next Tech Check podcast part of your day or commute. Please make sure that you hit the like and subscribe buttons at the end of today's podcast, or use these convenient on-screen QR codes to connect with us. You can both follow us on X, formerly known as Twitter, at the handles below. And until next time, have a great week. And Leonard, thanks again for calling in.
Absolutely. Take care.